I'm Addison Williams, 47 years old, and I built a tech startup from my Kit Williams table that was worth $12 million. dollars. But what my business partner did to steal it from me was even worse than the betrayal itself. If you've ever trusted someone with your life's work only to have them stab you in the back, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional devastation. 23 years ago, I was debugging code at 2 a.m. in a cramped Berkeley apartment, surviving on instant ramen and the dream that technology could change how small businesses manage their inventory. The smell of burnt coffee and the blue glow of my monitor were my constant companions. I had just quit my stable software engineering job at Oracle to chase what everyone called a crazy idea, creating cloud-based inventory management software that didn't require a computer science degree to operate. My mother called me weekly, speaking in Mandarin about the security I was throwing away, while my then boyfriend threatened to leave if I didn't get serious about my career. But I could see the future. Small businesses were drowning in spreadsheets and outdated systems, and I knew I could build something that would actually help them thrive. My breakthrough came during a conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned a corner market near my apartment. She was manually tracking inventory on index cards, losing money on spoiled produce because she couldn't predict demand patterns. I spent 3 weeks in her store watching customer flows, understanding her pain points, and building a prototype that could integrate with her existing point-of-sale system. When she saw real-time inventory alerts preventing her from over-ordering perishables, tears formed in her eyes. "Mija," she said, "this will save my business." That validation was worth more than any venture capital pitch. I knew I was onto something revolutionary. The early years were a masterclass in resourcefulness and determination. I bootstrapped everything, writing code during the day and doing consulting work at night to pay rent. My first office was a shared workspace in Oakland that smelled like stale pizza and had inconsistent Wi-Fi, but it was mine. I learned to negotiate with suppliers, handle customer complaints, and present to potential investors who often dismissed me before I finished explaining the technology. One memorable pitch meeting ended with a venture capitalist suggesting I find a more experienced male co-founder to lead the business side. I smiled politely, then spent the next 6 months proving them wrong by landing 3 major clients and doubling our revenue. Building professional credibility in the male-dominated tech industry required strategic thinking and flawless execution. I spoke at industry conferences, contributed to open-source projects, and mentored other women entrepreneurs through accelerator programs. My software was featured in TechCrunch as the inventory solution SMBs have been waiting for, and I was invited to join the Small Business Technology Advisory Board for the California Department of Commerce. Recognition from peers mattered more than any award. Other entrepreneurs started reaching out for advice, and established companies began approaching us for partnerships. The validation felt incredible, but it also made me a target for those who couldn't accept a woman of color leading innovation in enterprise software. The golden period arrived in year 8, when everything aligned perfectly. We had grown to 15 employees, occupied a beautiful converted warehouse in Oakland's Temescal district, and our customer retention rate hit 94%. The office buzzed with creative energy. Developers collaborated on standing desks made from reclaimed wood. Our customer success team celebrated wins by ringing an actual ship's bell we'd found at a flea market, and Friday afternoons meant local food trucks and team hackathons. Revenue had grown 300% year over year, and we were processing inventory data for over 2,000 small businesses across the West Coast. Industry analysts were predicting we'd be acquired within 2 years, and 3 major competitors had attempted to poach our engineering team. I felt unstoppable, like we were on the verge of something truly transformative. But success in Silicon Valley attracts vultures, and I should have paid more attention to the subtle shifts happening around me. Board meetings started feeling different. Longer discussions about market positioning and scaling challenges that seemed to exclude me from key decisions. Marcus, who I'd brought on as COO 3 years earlier, began scheduling more private investor calls and speaking about operational efficiency in ways that made my technical achievements sound less valuable. The warning signs were there: hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, strategic documents I wasn't included on, and a growing sense that decisions were being made without my input. I dismissed these concerns as paranoia brought on by stress, convincing myself that successful partnerships required trust and delegation. I had no idea that trust was about to destroy everything I'd built. The foundation of my career was built on solving real problems for people who needed technology but couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions. After graduating from UC Berkeley with a computer science degree, I spent 5 years at Oracle working on database optimization, but I felt disconnected from the end users. Corporate software development meant endless meetings about features that executives wanted rather than solutions customers actually needed. My colleagues were brilliant, but they were building for other corporations, not for the family-owned restaurants and small manufacturers who were struggling with basic business operations. I knew there was a better way to approach software development, one that prioritized user experience and accessibility over flashy features that impressed investors. The breakthrough that would define my career came through understanding small business owners as people, not just market segments. I spent countless hours in shops, restaurants, and small warehouses watching how people actually worked. Most small business owners were using a patchwork of spreadsheets, handwritten notes, and gut instincts to manage inventory because existing software solutions were either too expensive or too complicated. They needed something that could grow with their business, integrate with systems they already used, and provide insights without requiring extensive training. This human-centered approach to product development became our competitive advantage, and the reason customers loved working with us. Professional relationships in the tech industry are built on credibility, and I earned mine through consistent delivery and genuine expertise. My first major industry recognition came when I was invited to speak at the National Small Business Technology Summit about democratizing enterprise software. The audience of 800 entrepreneurs and technology leaders gave me a standing ovation when I demonstrated how our platform could help a bakery owner optimize their supply chain with just a few clicks. That presentation led to partnerships with 3 major point-of-sale providers and established me as a thought leader in small business technology. Industry publications started featuring our work, and investors began reaching out to us instead of the other way around. Building a team that shared my vision required finding people who understood that technology should serve users, not impress other developers. Our first hire was Elena, a UX designer who had been frustrated by how enterprise software ignored actual workflow patterns. Our second was David, a back-end engineer who left Google because he wanted to build something that mattered to real people. Each new team member brought skills and perspectives that strengthened our mission, and our collaborative culture became one of our biggest recruiting advantages. We offered equity to everyone, held weekly all-hands meetings where any team member could raise concerns, and made decisions based on user feedback rather than executive assumptions. The company culture we built was intentionally different from typical Silicon Valley startups. Instead of ping-pong tables and unlimited snacks, we focused on flexible schedules, professional development budgets, and direct connection to our customers. Every new employee spent their first week shadowing customer success calls to understand how real businesses used our software. We measured success by customer satisfaction scores and employee retention rates, not just revenue growth and investor interest. This approach attracted talent who were motivated by impact rather than just equity potential, and it created a workplace where people genuinely cared about our mission. However, I should have been more aware of how my success was creating resentment and opportunism among some colleagues and partners. The tech industry has a complex relationship with women who achieve independent success, especially women of color who refuse to play by traditional power dynamics. Some people who had initially supported my vision began suggesting that the company needed more experienced leadership or adult supervision as we grew. These comments were always framed as helpful advice, but they planted seeds of doubt about my ability to scale the business. I was so focused on building great products and serving customers that I didn't recognize how some people around me were positioning themselves to take credit for our success. Marcus joined us as COO during our 6th year, recommended by one of our board members as someone who could help manage the operational complexity of rapid growth. His resume was impressive: MBA from Wharton, previous experience at 3 successful startups, and extensive connections in the venture capital community. During his interview process, he spoke passionately about our mission and demonstrated deep understanding of small business challenges. I was excited to partner with someone who could handle fundraising and strategic partnerships while I focused on product development and customer relationships. His first 6 months were excellent. He streamlined our sales process, negotiated better vendor contracts, and established relationships with potential acquisition targets. The dynamic began shifting subtly in year 7, when Marcus started positioning himself as the business brain of our partnership while characterizing my role as primarily technical. In board meetings, he would present strategic initiatives as his ideas, even when they originated from customer feedback I had gathered or technical innovations my team had developed. He began speaking about the company's future in terms of what we're building rather than acknowledging the foundation I had already created. When journalists interviewed us, he would answer questions about company vision and strategy while directing technical questions to me, creating the impression that I was simply the CTO rather than the founder and driving force behind our success. The most troubling pattern was how Marcus gradually excluded me from investor relations and partnership discussions. He argued that dividing responsibilities would make us more efficient. He would handle the business side while I focused on product and technology. This seemed logical initially, but it meant I was losing direct relationships with the people who controlled our funding and strategic direction. When investors called with questions about our technology or customer base, they were increasingly directed to Marcus rather than speaking with me directly. He assured me this was standard practice for growing companies, and I trusted his experience in startup operations. I didn't realize he was systematically positioning himself as the primary decision maker while diminishing my role as the visionary founder. But small signs of manipulation were becoming harder to ignore. Marcus would schedule important calls during times when I was traveling or in deep customer meetings, then brief me afterwards on decisions that had already been made. He started using phrases like Addison's technical team instead of acknowledging my leadership role, and he would interrupt me in meetings to clarify business implications of technical decisions. When I raised concerns about being excluded from strategic discussions, he would apologize and promise better communication, but the patterns continued. I began documenting these incidents in a private journal, not because I suspected betrayal, but because I wanted to improve our working relationship and communication. The day everything unraveled started like any other Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at our Oakland office at 7:30 a.m., an hour before most of the team, to review customer feedback from our latest feature release. The morning air was crisp, and I could smell coffee brewing from the artisanal roastery downstairs as I climbed the stairs to our second-floor workspace. Our office had exposed brick walls covered with customer testimonials and product roadmap sketches, and the early morning light streaming through our large windows always filled me with optimism about the work ahead. I loved these quiet moments before the team arrived, when I could think strategically about product direction and respond to customer emails without interruption. My routine was disrupted by an urgent email from Elena, our head of design, marked with the red flag that indicated something serious. The subject line read, "Emergency, check your email immediately," and her message was unlike anything I'd ever received from her. She wrote that she had received a call from a recruiter asking about her availability for a transition period following our upcoming acquisition. The recruiter had specific details about our technology stack, customer base, and team structure that should have been confidential information. Elena was confused and concerned because she had no knowledge of any acquisition discussions, and she couldn't understand how an external recruiter would have such detailed information about our internal operations. I immediately called Elena, and her voice was shaking as she described the conversation. The recruiter had mentioned that Marcus had recommended her as a key retention target during the transition period, and they wanted to discuss a retention package that would keep her with the acquiring company for at least 2 years. Elena asked direct questions about the timeline and terms, but the recruiter assumed she was already aware of the basic details and only wanted to discuss her specific role in the transition. The call ended when Elena explained that she had no knowledge of any acquisition, at which point the recruiter realized they had made a mistake and quickly ended the conversation. Panic and confusion flooded through me as I tried to process what this meant. We had not discussed any acquisition plans with the team, and I certainly had not authorized Marcus to share confidential information with external recruiters. I immediately checked our shared calendar and email systems to look for any meetings or communications I might have missed, but there was no record of acquisition discussions or recruiter outreach. My hands were shaking as I called Marcus's cell phone, but it went directly to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me immediately about an urgent business matter, then sat in my office trying to understand how this situation could have developed without my knowledge. The second shock came 30 minutes later when David, our lead back-end engineer, forwarded me an email he had received from our legal counsel requesting that he compile technical documentation for a due diligence review. The email was professionally written and appeared to come from our regular attorney, but it requested detailed information about our code base, security protocols, and development processes that would typically only be shared during acquisition negotiations. David was confused because he had not been informed of any due diligence process, and he wanted to confirm the request with me before sharing sensitive technical information. The email was CC'd to Marcus, but not to me, which violated our standard protocol for any legal or financial communications. I called our attorney's office immediately, but they had no record of sending any due diligence requests. In fact, they were surprised to hear that someone was requesting technical documentation and suggested we investigate immediately whether our email systems had been compromised. The assistant explained that their firm would never request sensitive information via email without prior authorization from all company founders, and they recommended that we treat this as a potential security breach. My stomach dropped as I realized that someone was impersonating our legal counsel to gather confidential information about our company, and the only person with enough internal knowledge to coordinate such an effort was Marcus. The third piece of the puzzle arrived as I was calling our attorney. Priya from our customer success team knocked on my office door with a concerned expression and a printed email in her hand. She had received a message from one of our largest clients asking about transition plans and whether their service would be affected by our recent partnership announcement. The client was worried about continuity of service and wanted to schedule a call to discuss how the change in ownership would impact their ongoing projects. Priya had no idea what partnership announcement they were referring to, and she couldn't find any press releases or company communications about partnership changes. I asked Priya to forward me the client's email immediately, and when I read it, I discovered that they were referencing a news article about our acquisition that had apparently been published that morning. The client had included a link to a TechCrunch article with the headline Oakland Inventory Management Startup Acquired in $12 million deal. My heart stopped as I clicked the link and saw our company logo alongside a professional photo of Marcus positioned as the CEO and founder. The article described the acquisition as a strategic move by a larger enterprise software company to expand their small business offerings, and it quoted Marcus extensively about his vision for integrating our platform with their existing products. According to the article, the acquisition had been in negotiations for 3 months and was finalized the previous week. Marcus was quoted as saying that the deal would allow his company to reach more customers and access resources needed for rapid scaling. The article mentioned that the acquisition included all intellectual property, customer contracts, and key personnel, with the acquiring company planning to maintain our current team and office location. There was no mention of me anywhere in the article, despite the fact that I had founded the company and remained the largest individual shareholder. The acquiring company was described as excited to work with Marcus to integrate our technology with their platform and expand to national markets. I read the article 3 times, each reading making me more furious and confused. This was impossible. We had not agreed to any acquisition, and I certainly had not authorized Marcus to negotiate on behalf of the company. As the founder and majority shareholder, any acquisition would require my explicit approval and signature on legal documents. I grabbed our incorporation papers and shareholder agreements from my office safe, reviewing the governance structures we had established. According to our legal documents, Marcus had no authority to negotiate or execute an acquisition without board approval, and the board included me as the chairperson. But as I continued reading our corporate documents, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. There was an amendment to our operating agreement that I didn't remember signing, dated 6 months earlier. The amendment appeared to grant Marcus emergency operational authority during periods when I was unavailable for strategic decision-making due to technical responsibilities. The language was confusing and buried in legal terminology, but it seemed to suggest that Marcus could make certain business decisions if I was deemed to be too focused on product development to participate in strategic planning. I had no memory of reviewing or approving this amendment, but my signature appeared at the bottom of the document. I immediately called Elena and David back into my office and explained what I had discovered. Their faces reflected the same shock and betrayal I was feeling. Elena mentioned that Marcus had asked her to sign several routine HR updates a few months earlier, and she wondered if there had been legal documents mixed in with the employee handbook changes she had signed. David remembered being asked to witness document signatures for corporate housekeeping but hadn't read the details of what he was witnessing. We realized that Marcus had been systematically gathering signatures and authorizations for months, possibly preparing for this moment when he could claim legal authority to make decisions without my involvement. The reality of our situation was becoming clear, but the full extent of Marcus's betrayal was still unknown. I needed to understand exactly what legal commitments had been made and whether there was any way to reverse or challenge the acquisition. But first, I had to determine whether our employees, customers, and investors had been informed of these developments, and I needed to prevent any further unauthorized actions that could damage our relationships or our legal position. The morning that had started with optimism about customer feedback had transformed into a nightmare of professional betrayal that threatened to destroy everything I had spent 9 years building. The first escalating confrontation began in our main conference room at 10 a.m., when I demanded an emergency meeting with Marcus to discuss the acquisition announcement. The room featured our custom-built table made from reclaimed Oakland pier wood, surrounded by chairs that had been carefully selected for long strategy sessions, but the familiar space felt hostile and foreign as I waited for Marcus to arrive. Natural light streamed through our large windows overlooking the Oakland estuary, but the beauty of the view couldn't diminish the tension radiating through my body. Elena and David sat near me, having requested to witness the conversation while Marcus arrived 15 minutes late with his laptop and a legal folder that I had never seen before. Marcus entered the room with a confidence that immediately set me on edge, greeting everyone as if this were a routine business meeting rather than a confrontation about unauthorized decision-making. "Good morning, team," he said, settling into his chair and opening his laptop without making eye contact with me. "I assume you're here to discuss the partnership announcement. I know the timing seems abrupt, but these opportunities require quick action in our competitive market." His tone was measured and professional, but there was an underlying smugness that suggested he felt completely in control of the situation. I realized he had prepared for this conversation and was ready to defend his actions with legal and business justifications. "Partnership announcement?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "Marcus, this is an acquisition that I never approved, negotiated, or even knew about until our customers started asking questions this morning. How is it possible that our company was sold without my knowledge or consent?" I pulled out the printed TechCrunch article and placed it on the table, pointing to the sections that quoted him as the founder and CEO. "This article positions you as the leader of this company and doesn't mention my role as the actual founder. I need you to explain what legal authority you used to negotiate this deal, and I need to understand how our corporate governance allowed this to happen." Marcus opened his legal folder and pulled out a stack of documents, arranging them on the table with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this presentation. "Addison, I understand your surprise, but everything I've done has been within the legal framework we established for operational efficiency," he began, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child. "6 months ago, you approved expanded operational authority for me to handle time-sensitive business development opportunities while you focused on technical leadership. The board agreed that rapid decision-making was essential for capturing market opportunities, and you signed the documentation authorizing me to negotiate partnerships and strategic alliances on behalf of the company." "I never signed any documents giving you authority to sell our company," I replied, pulling out my copy of the amended operating agreement. "This document talks about operational authority, not ownership transfers or acquisitions. There's a significant legal difference between managing business development and transferring ownership of intellectual property and assets." I could feel my hands shaking as I spoke, but I was determined to maintain professional composure despite the magnitude of his betrayal. "Even if this document grants you some expanded authority, any acquisition would require board approval and shareholder consent. I own 51% of this company, and I never consented to any sale." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, revealing a flash of irritation before returning to his practiced calm. "Actually, Addison, the ownership structure is more complex than you realize," he said, pulling out another document that made my stomach drop. "And we restructured for our Series A funding. The equity distribution included provisions for operational contributions and business development success. Based on the value I've created through customer acquisition and partnership development, my ownership stake has grown to 45%, with an additional 15% held in escrow for performance milestones that I've now achieved. The acquisition triggers those milestone payments, which gives me majority control for the purposes of this transaction." I grabbed the document he was referencing, scanning through pages of legal language that I didn't remember reviewing or approving. The provisions he was citing seemed to suggest that his ownership could increase based on business development achievements, but the language was buried in complex legal terminology that would have required careful analysis to understand. "Marcus, I never agreed to any equity redistribution based on your performance," I said, my voice becoming stronger as my shock transformed into anger. "Our original equity agreement was clear. I retained majority ownership as the founder and primary architect of our technology. You can't retroactively change ownership structure without explicit board approval and legal documentation that I review and approve." "The board did approve these changes," Marcus replied, pulling out meeting minutes that appeared to document board discussions I didn't remember attending. "Here are the records from our quarterly board meetings where we discussed the equity adjustments and performance milestones. You participated in these discussions via video conference, and your comments are documented in the official minutes." He pointed to specific entries that showed my apparent participation in conversations about equity restructuring and operational authority expansion. The documents looked official and professional, complete with timestamps and digital signatures, but I had no memory of these conversations or decisions. Elena interrupted our exchange with a question that cut to the heart of the manipulation. "Marcus, if these board meetings and decisions were legitimate, why wasn't the rest of the team informed about the acquisition discussions?" she asked, her voice steady but clearly angry. "We're equity holders too, and we have rights to information about transactions that affect our ownership stakes. The first we heard about any of this was when recruiters and clients started calling us about transition plans. That suggests these decisions were made in secret, which raises serious questions about whether proper corporate governance procedures were followed. Marcus turned to Elena with the same patronizing tone he had used with me. Elena, I appreciate your concern, but employee equity holders don't have the same information rights as board members and major shareholders, he explained, as if he were teaching a business school class. The acquisition negotiations required confidentiality agreements that prevented broad communication until the deal was finalized. That's standard practice in merger and acquisition activity, and it's designed to protect both companies from market speculation and competitive interference. I understand the surprise, but this is how professional business transactions are conducted in our industry. Confidentiality agreements don't authorize unauthorized decision-making, I said, standing up from my chair as my anger overcame my attempt at professional restraint. Marcus, you systematically excluded me from investor relations, gathered signatures under false pretenses, and apparently falsified board meeting records to create legal justification for selling my company without my consent. This isn't business development. This is fraud and theft of intellectual property. I'm calling our attorney immediately, and I'm prepared to file legal action to reverse this transaction and hold you accountable for breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus closed his laptop and gathered his documents, his mask of professional courtesy finally slipping to reveal the calculated ambition underneath. Addison, I'd be very careful about making accusations of fraud or theft, he said, his voice becoming cold and threatening. The legal documentation is thorough and properly executed, and any challenge to this transaction could result in significant legal costs and reputational damage for you personally. The acquiring company has deep legal resources, and they're prepared to defend this transaction against any frivolous challenges. I'd suggest that you focus on ensuring a smooth transition for our employees and customers rather than pursuing legal action that you can't win. The meeting ended with Marcus walking out of the conference room, leaving me with Elena and David to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. I realized that this wasn't just about an unauthorized acquisition, it was about systematic manipulation and legal maneuvering that had been planned for months. Marcus had positioned himself to steal my company by creating false legal documentation, manipulating corporate governance procedures, and exploiting my trust in our partnership. The conference room that had been the site of so many collaborative strategic discussions now felt like a crime scene where my professional life had been murdered. The second escalating scene began the following morning when I arrived at our office to discover that my access credentials had been revoked overnight. The key card that had opened our building for 3 years now produced an angry red light and error beep when I tried to enter through our main entrance. I had to call our building security guard, who apologetically explained that he had received instructions to restrict my access pending ownership transition procedures. The guard, who had known me since we moved into the building, looked embarrassed as he escorted me to the front desk to verify my identity and request temporary access to collect my personal belongings. Inside our office space, the systematic isolation became immediately apparent. My computer had been remotely wiped overnight, displaying only a standard corporate login screen that no longer recognized my credentials. The family photos, industry awards, and customer appreciation letters that had decorated my office for years were packed into cardboard boxes stacked near the door, as if someone had prepared for my departure before I even knew I was leaving. Elena met me at my office with tears in her eyes, explaining that she had arrived early to find facilities management removing my personal items under Marcus's direction. The team was confused and angry, but they had been told that any interference with transition procedures could jeopardize their own employment status. My email access had been terminated, cutting me off from customer communications, vendor relationships, and legal documentation stored in our cloud systems. When I tried to log into our project management systems, customer relationship database, and financial tracking software, I received error messages indicating that my user privileges had been revoked by system administrators. David explained that Marcus had requested security updates the previous evening, claiming that temporary access restrictions were necessary to protect sensitive information during the acquisition due diligence process. The team had assumed these were routine precautions, not realizing that Marcus was systematically cutting me off from the business I had built. The financial implications of my isolation became clear when I called our business bank to inquire about our company accounts. The bank representative informed me that my signatory authority had been suspended pending verification of corporate leadership changes, and that Marcus had presented legal documentation establishing him as the primary account manager. All banking activity required his approval, including payroll processing, vendor payments, and expense reimbursements. When I explained that I was the company founder and majority shareholder, the bank representative sympathetically suggested that I would need to provide legal documentation to restore my access, a process that could take several weeks. Customer relationships were being systematically transferred away from me through a coordinated communication strategy that positioned Marcus as the primary point of contact for all strategic accounts. Elena showed me emails that Marcus had sent to our top 20 customers, introducing himself as the CEO and explaining that I would be transitioning to a technical advisory role during the acquisition integration. The emails were professionally written and positioned the change as a natural evolution of our company leadership, but they effectively removed me from direct customer relationships that I had spent years developing. Several customers had responded with confusion, asking to speak with me directly about the changes, but those inquiries were being routed to Marcus rather than forwarded to me. The most devastating discovery came when David showed me evidence of coordinated communication among team members about my performance issues and leadership challenges. Marcus had apparently been conducting individual meetings with key employees, discussing concerns about my technical focus, limiting our business growth, and my resistance to professional management practices that were necessary for scaling the company. These conversations had been framed as confidential feedback sessions about company culture and management effectiveness, but they had systematically planted seeds of doubt about my leadership competence and business judgment. Elena revealed that Marcus had asked her to document instances when I had been unavailable for business decisions due to technical priorities, or when my perfectionist approach to product development had slowed down business development opportunities. She had initially interpreted these requests as efforts to improve communication and workflow efficiency, but she now realized that Marcus had been building a case for my incompetence as a business leader. Several team members had been asked similar questions about my leadership style, decision-making processes, and availability for strategic planning, creating a documented pattern of performance concerns that could justify my removal from operational leadership. The isolation strategy extended to our industry relationships and professional network through carefully orchestrated communication about my reduced role in company operations. Marcus had contacted industry journalists, conference organizers, and professional associations to explain that I was stepping back from business leadership to focus on technical innovation, effectively removing me from speaking opportunities and industry recognition that had established my professional reputation. When I tried to contact industry colleagues about the situation, several mentioned that they had heard I was taking a sabbatical from business operations or pursuing technical research projects that would limit my involvement in day-to-day company management. The psychological impact of systematic professional isolation was more devastating than I had anticipated. Watching my life's work being systematically transferred to someone else while being portrayed as incompetent and absent created a level of stress that affected my sleep, appetite, and ability to think clearly about legal and strategic responses. The office space that had been my second home for years now felt hostile and unfamiliar, with team members avoiding eye contact and conversation stopping when I approached. The sense of betrayal was compounded by the realization that people I had trusted and mentored had participated in documenting my alleged shortcomings, even if they hadn't understood the ultimate purpose of their feedback. However, the isolation strategy also revealed the strength of relationships I had built with customers, vendors, and industry colleagues who knew my work firsthand. Several customers called me directly to express confusion about the leadership changes and to request meetings to discuss their concerns about continuity of service and product development. Industry colleagues reached out to offer support and to question the narrative about my reduced role, having worked with me closely enough to know that the characterizations didn't match their experience of my leadership and business acumen. These conversations provided both emotional support and important intelligence about how Marcus was positioning the acquisition and my role in the transition. By the end of the second day of isolation, I realized that Marcus's strategy was designed to accomplish two goals: legally establishing his authority to make business decisions, while psychologically destroying my confidence and professional relationships. The systematic nature of the effort suggested significant planning and coordination, possibly with guidance from legal and business advisors who specialized in corporate takeovers. But the strategy also revealed weaknesses in his position. The need to isolate me suggested that he couldn't defend his actions in direct confrontation, and the manipulation of team members and customers indicated that his legal authority was questionable enough to require extensive narrative management. The third escalating scene unfolded during what Marcus called an all-hands strategic transition meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon in our main workspace. The entire team was present, along with two people I didn't recognize who were introduced as integration specialists from the acquiring company. Marcus had arranged the seating so that I was positioned at the side of the room rather than in my usual leadership position, and he began the meeting by thanking everyone for their flexibility during this exciting transition period. The atmosphere was tense, with team members clearly uncomfortable about the changes and unsure about how to navigate the conflicting information they had received about company leadership and ownership. Marcus presented a polished PowerPoint presentation outlining the strategic benefits of the acquisition and the enhanced opportunities it would create for team members and customers. His slides included financial projections showing increased revenue potential, expanded market reach, and accelerated product development timelines that painted the acquisition as an unqualified success for all stakeholders. He spoke confidently about integration plans, retention packages for key employees, and the acquiring company's commitment to maintaining our company culture and values. The presentation was designed to generate excitement and minimize concerns about the dramatic changes occurring without advance notice or explanation. When Marcus opened the floor for questions, Elena immediately challenged the narrative he had presented. Marcus, I think everyone here is confused about how this acquisition was negotiated and approved without Addison's involvement, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had worked closely with our founding team for years. Addison founded this company, developed our core technology, and has been our leader throughout our growth. Can you explain how an acquisition can proceed without her approval and why she wasn't part of these strategic discussions? Her question created visible discomfort among the integration specialists, who exchanged glances suggesting they hadn't been informed about internal leadership disputes. Marcus responded with the same patronizing tone he had used in our previous confrontation, but his explanation was more elaborate and carefully constructed for the larger audience. Elena, I appreciate that question because it gives me an opportunity to clarify the governance structure that has evolved as our company has matured, he began, pulling up a slide that showed an organizational chart positioning him as CEO and me as Chief Technology Officer. As companies grow beyond the startup phase, it's common for founders to specialize in their areas of expertise while bringing in operational leadership to handle business development, investor relations, and strategic partnerships. Addison has chosen to focus on technology and product development, which allows me to handle the business side of our operations, including partnership negotiations and acquisition opportunities. But Addison never agreed to step back from strategic leadership, David interjected, his technical background making him particularly sensitive to misrepresentation of decision-making processes. She's been actively involved in customer relationships, business planning, and strategic direction throughout our company's growth. This organizational chart doesn't reflect the leadership structure we've been operating under, and it certainly doesn't explain how acquisition decisions were made without board approval that included her as the majority shareholder. His challenge was supported by nods from several team members who had worked directly with me on strategic initiatives. One of the integration specialists asked a question that revealed how little the acquiring company knew about our internal leadership dynamics. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we were told that Mr. Cohen was the primary decision maker for this transaction, and that organizational changes had already been implemented to support the acquisition process, she said, consulting notes on her tablet. Are you suggesting that there are unresolved governance issues that could affect the completion of this transaction? Our legal team needs to understand any potential complications before we proceed with integration planning. Her question created visible tension in the room, as it became clear that the acquiring company had been misled about the legitimacy of Marcus's authority. Marcus's response revealed the extent of his deception and the legal vulnerabilities in his position. There are no governance issues that affect this transaction, he said, but his voice lacked the confidence he had displayed earlier. Any internal discussions about leadership roles are separate from the legal authority to execute business partnerships and strategic alliances. The documentation supporting this transaction has been reviewed by qualified legal counsel, and all necessary approvals have been obtained according to our corporate governance procedures. However, his refusal to provide specific details about board approvals or shareholder consent created obvious doubt among both our team members and the integration specialists. I decided to directly challenge Marcus's narrative in front of the team and the acquiring company representatives. Marcus, you're misrepresenting our governance structure and my role in this company, I said, standing up to address the room directly. I founded this company. I remain the majority shareholder according to our original incorporation documents, and I never approved any acquisition negotiations or ownership transfers. The organizational chart you're showing doesn't reflect our legal governance structure, and the acquisition you're describing was negotiated without my knowledge or consent. I'm prepared to provide legal documentation that contradicts every claim you've made about your authority to execute this transaction. The integration specialists immediately requested a break to contact their legal team, explaining that they needed to verify the legitimacy of the transaction before proceeding with any integration activities. One of them asked me directly whether I was challenging the legal validity of the acquisition, and I confirmed that I was prepared to take legal action to reverse any unauthorized transfer of ownership or intellectual property. The acquiring company representative stepped outside to make phone calls, leaving our team in an extremely uncomfortable situation where the legitimacy of the entire transaction was being questioned in real time. During the break, several team members approached me to express their support and to share information about pressure they had received from Marcus to document my alleged performance issues. Priya from Customer Success revealed that Marcus had asked her to compile examples of customer complaints or technical problems that could be attributed to my leadership decisions, but she had been unable to find any significant issues because our customer satisfaction rates were consistently high. Tom from Sales explained that Marcus had suggested that major clients were concerned about my technical focus limiting business development opportunities, but Tom's direct customer relationships contradicted that narrative entirely. When the meeting reconvened, the integration specialists announced that their legal team had advised them to suspend all integration activities pending resolution of the governance dispute. They explained that their company could not proceed with an acquisition if there were legitimate questions about the authority of the person who had negotiated the transaction, and they would need independent legal verification of ownership structure and decision-making authority before moving forward. Marcus's reaction to this announcement revealed the extent of his legal vulnerability, his face flushed with anger, and he began making veiled threats about legal consequences for anyone who interfered with the transaction. The meeting ended with Marcus storming out of the room, followed by the integration specialists who were clearly uncomfortable with the situation they had discovered. Our team was left to process the reality that our company's future was now uncertain, with competing claims about leadership and ownership that would need to be resolved through legal proceedings. However, there was also a sense of relief that the truth about Marcus's unauthorized actions was finally being exposed, and that the acquiring company was taking the governance dispute seriously rather than proceeding with a potentially fraudulent transaction. The fourth and most intense escalating scene occurred the following Monday when Marcus returned to the office with his own attorney and attempted to force through the acquisition by presenting what he claimed was an emergency board resolution authorizing the transaction. The attorney, a sharp-dressed woman from a prominent San Francisco corporate law firm, carried a briefcase full of legal documents and immediately established a confrontational tone by demanding that I sign acknowledgement papers accepting my transition to an advisory role in the newly structured company. The conference room felt like a courtroom as Marcus and his legal representation sat across from me, Elena, and David, with the atmosphere charged with the tension of a final confrontation. Marcus's attorney began by explaining that her client had full legal authority to execute the acquisition based on corporate governance documents that had been properly executed and filed according to California corporate law. She presented a revised timeline that claimed the equity restructuring and operational authority changes had been approved through legitimate board processes, with my participation documented through recorded video conferences and digitally signed approvals. Her presentation was designed to overwhelm me with legal terminology and procedural details that would be difficult to challenge without extensive legal expertise and document review. However, I had spent the weekend working with my own attorney to analyze the legal documents Marcus had presented, and we had discovered multiple inconsistencies and potential forgeries that undermined his claims of legitimate authority. My attorney had identified discrepancies in signature formatting, document timestamps, and board meeting records that suggested systematic falsification of corporate governance procedures. When I presented this analysis to Marcus's attorney, her confident demeanor shifted noticeably as she realized that her client might have provided her with fraudulent documentation to support his legal position. The confrontation escalated when Marcus's attorney threatened legal action against me personally for interfering with legitimate business operations and making false accusations that damaged the reputation of qualified business professionals. She warned that any public statements questioning the legitimacy of the acquisition could result in defamation lawsuits and significant financial liability for both me and any employees who supported my version of events. Her threats were designed to intimidate me into accepting the acquisition terms rather than pursuing legal challenges that could expose the questionable nature of Marcus's documentation. But I had prepared for this moment by documenting every aspect of Marcus's deception and gathering evidence that would support legal action to reverse the unauthorized transaction. Your client has systematically deceived investors, employees, customers, and an acquiring company about his authority to make decisions on behalf of this company. I responded, pulling out a folder containing email communications, witness statements, and financial records that contradicted Marcus's narrative. The evidence shows deliberate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially criminal misrepresentation of corporate ownership and governance. I'm prepared to file both civil and criminal complaints that will expose the full extent of his deception. The meeting reached its climax when Marcus finally dropped his professional facade and revealed the personal animosity that had motivated his systematic betrayal. Addison, you've never understood the business side of this industry, he said, his voice filled with condescension and resentment. You're brilliant technically, but you don't have the strategic vision or professional relationships needed to scale a company in competitive markets. This acquisition provides the resources and leadership that our customers and employees deserve, and your stubborn refusal to accept reality is going to destroy everything we've built together. His words revealed that he genuinely believed he was saving the company from my inadequate leadership, despite having built his position through deception and manipulation. My response was fueled by 9 years of frustration with people who had underestimated my business capabilities while benefiting from my technical innovations and customer relationships. Marcus, everything you've achieved in this company was built on technology I developed, customers I acquired, and team members I hired and mentored, I said, my voice steady despite my anger. You've systematically lied to investors, manipulated corporate documents, and betrayed the trust of everyone who believed we were genuine partners. The only thing you've proven is that you're willing to commit fraud rather than earn success through legitimate business achievement. This acquisition is not going to proceed, and I'm going to make sure everyone in our industry knows exactly what kind of person you are. The confrontation ended when Marcus's attorney advised him to leave immediately to avoid further statements that could be used against him in legal proceedings. As they gathered their documents and prepared to exit the conference room, Marcus made one final threat that revealed the depth of his desperation. Addison, if you pursue legal action against this transaction, I will make sure that every investor and potential employer in Silicon Valley knows that you're a vindictive founder who destroys partnerships when you don't get your way, he said. Your reputation in this industry will be finished, and you'll never be able to raise funding or build another company. I'd suggest you take the advisory role and salvage what's left of your professional credibility. But his threat only strengthened my resolve to fight back and expose the truth about his systematic deception. The conference room where we had planned our company's growth and celebrated our successes had become the site of Marcus's final attempt to steal my life's work through intimidation and legal manipulation. As the door closed behind him and his attorney, I realized that the real battle was just beginning, but I also knew that I had the evidence, legal support, and moral clarity needed to reclaim my company and hold him accountable for his betrayal. The climax confrontation took place 3 weeks later in the downtown San Francisco offices of Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had been selected to mediate the ownership dispute before it proceeded to formal litigation. The 32nd floor conference room overlooked the Bay Bridge, with floor-to-ceiling windows that would have been impressive under different circumstances, but the panoramic view only emphasized how high the stakes had become for my professional future. Marcus arrived with his attorney and 2 additional legal advisors, along with a representative from the acquiring company who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the complexity of the ownership dispute became apparent. I was accompanied by my attorney, Addison Kim, a Stanford law graduate who specialized in startup governance disputes and had built her reputation defending founders against hostile takeovers and partnership betrayals. Also present were Elena and David as key witnesses to Marcus's systematic deception, and Jennifer Walsh, a forensic accountant who had spent 2 weeks analyzing our financial records and corporate documents to identify evidence of fraudulent documentation. The mediator, Judge Patricia Hernandez, was a retired Superior Court judge with extensive experience in complex business disputes and a reputation for cutting through legal manipulation to focus on factual evidence. Marcus's opening statement was a polished presentation designed to portray me as an unstable founder who was unable to accept the natural evolution of corporate leadership as companies mature and scale. His attorney argued that the acquisition represented legitimate business development by qualified operational leadership, and that my challenges to the transaction were motivated by personal resentment rather than legal merit. They presented their version of events as a standard corporate governance situation where technical founders often resist professional management practices that are necessary for business growth and investor relations. However, their narrative immediately faced challenges when Judge Hernandez asked specific questions about the documentation supporting Marcus's authority to negotiate the acquisition. Mr. Cohen, I've reviewed the corporate governance documents you've submitted, and I have questions about the timeline and approval process for the equity restructuring that you claim grants you majority control, she said, consulting notes that suggested she had already identified problems with his legal position. Can you provide specific details about the board meetings where these changes were approved, including video conference records and independent verification of shareholder consent? Marcus's response revealed the first cracks in his legal facade as he struggled to provide coherent explanations for document discrepancies that my legal team had identified. Your Honor, the board approval process was conducted according to standard corporate procedures, with proper notice and documentation of decisions, he said. But his voice lacked conviction, and his answers became increasingly vague when pressed for specific details. When Judge Hernandez asked to see the original signed documents rather than digital copies, Marcus's attorney requested a brief recess to organize the documentation properly, which created obvious suspicion about the authenticity of their evidence. The turning point came when Jennifer Walsh presented her forensic analysis of the financial records and corporate documents that Marcus had used to support his claims of expanded authority and equity restructuring. Her presentation was methodical and devastating, showing digital metadata that proved several key documents had been created or modified after the dates they purported to represent. Your Honor, the equity restructuring agreement shows creation timestamps that post-date the board meeting when it was allegedly approved, she explained, displaying technical evidence on a large screen. Additionally, the signature formats show inconsistencies that suggest digital manipulation rather than authentic execution of legal documents. Marcus's attorney objected to the forensic analysis, claiming that technical metadata was not reliable evidence of document fraud, but Judge Hernandez was clearly interested in the factual discrepancies that were emerging. Counselor, these are serious allegations of document falsification that go to the heart of your client's legal authority, she said, turning to address Marcus directly. Cohen, are you prepared to provide testimony under oath about your involvement in creating and modifying these corporate governance documents? And are you willing to submit to examination about the specific board meetings and shareholder approvals that you claim authorize your actions? The moment of truth arrived when Elena was called to testify about her direct experience with Marcus's systematic manipulation of team members and corporate processes. Her testimony was calm, detailed, and supported by email communications and contemporaneous notes that she had maintained throughout the period when Marcus was building his case for removing me from operational leadership. He asked me to document instances when Addison was unavailable for business decisions and when her technical focus created problems for business development, Elena explained. At the time, I thought he was trying to improve communication and workflow, but I now realize he was building a false narrative about her competence as a business leader. David's testimony provided technical evidence about the systematic isolation tactics that Marcus had used to cut me off from company systems and customer relationships. He presented a timeline showing how my access credentials were revoked, email systems were compromised, and customer communications were redirected, all of which occurred before any legitimate board approval for leadership changes. The technical evidence shows coordinated action to remove Addison from operational control of the company before any legal authority for those changes had been established, David explained. This pattern suggests premeditation and systematic planning rather than routine corporate governance procedures. The climax moment came when Judge Hernandez asked Marcus to explain why he had proceeded with acquisition negotiations without ensuring that all shareholders were properly informed and consulted about the transaction. Mr. Cohen, even if we accept your claims about expanded operational authority, California corporate law requires specific procedures for ownership transfers that affect shareholder rights, she said, her tone indicating growing skepticism about his legal position. Can you explain why Miss Williams, as the founder and claimed majority shareholder, was systematically excluded from acquisition discussions that would transfer her ownership rights to a third party? Marcus's response revealed the full extent of his legal vulnerability and the weakness of his position when subjected to direct questioning by an experienced judge. Your Honor, the acquisition was structured as an asset transfer and partnership agreement rather than an ownership change, which allowed for streamlined approval processes under our operational authority provisions, he said. But his explanation was filled with legal contradictions and procedural inconsistencies that Judge Hernandez immediately challenged. When pressed for specifics about how asset transfers could occur without shareholder consent, Marcus became defensive and his answers became increasingly incoherent. The confrontation reached its peak when my attorney presented recorded phone conversations with the acquiring company's legal team, who confirmed that they had been misled about the governance situation and were now questioning the legitimacy of the entire transaction. Your Honor, the acquiring company has confirmed that they were told Mr. Cohen had full authority to negotiate on behalf of all shareholders, and they were not informed about ownership disputes or governance challenges, Addison Kim explained. They've now suspended the acquisition pending resolution of these issues, which demonstrates that even the third party recognizes the questionable nature of Mr. Cohen's claimed authority. Judge Hernandez's final questions focused on the evidence of document manipulation and fraudulent representation that had emerged throughout the mediation session. Mr. Cohen, the evidence presented today suggests systematic deception about corporate governance, falsification of legal documents, and misrepresentation of your authority to third parties, she said, her tone making clear that she had reached conclusions about the merits of the dispute. Are you prepared to acknowledge that the acquisition cannot proceed based on the documentation you've provided? And are you willing to discuss restoration of proper corporate governance to resolve this dispute without formal litigation? The mediation session ended with Marcus's legal team requesting time to review their position and consider settlement options, which was a clear acknowledgement that their case could not withstand legal scrutiny. As we left the Morrison and Associates offices, I felt a sense of vindication that the truth about Marcus's systematic betrayal had been exposed in a formal legal setting. The confrontation had revealed the full extent of his deception while also demonstrating that justice was possible when victims of professional betrayal had the courage to fight back with evidence and qualified legal support. The immediate aftermath of the mediation session created a domino effect that rapidly dismantled Marcus's carefully constructed deception and began the process of restoring legitimate corporate governance to my company. Within 48 hours of Judge Hernandez's preliminary findings, the acquiring company formally withdrew from the transaction and issued a statement explaining that they could not proceed with an acquisition based on disputed corporate authority and questionable documentation. Their legal team had conducted an independent review of the governance issues raised during mediation and concluded that proceeding with the transaction would expose them to significant legal liability and reputational damage. Marcus's position became completely untenable when our corporate attorney received a letter from his law firm withdrawing from representation due to irreconcilable differences regarding factual representations made by the client. The withdrawal was accompanied by a statement that the firm could not continue representation in light of evidence suggesting potential document falsification and misrepresentation of legal authority. This development effectively ended Marcus's ability to defend his actions through qualified legal counsel and created additional evidence that his claims of legitimate authority were fraudulent. The restoration of my operational control began immediately as our corporate attorney worked to reverse the unauthorized changes that Marcus had implemented to company systems and legal structure. My access credentials were restored to all company systems, banking authorities were reinstated after legal verification of my shareholder status, and customer communications were redirected back to proper channels. The process required extensive documentation and verification procedures, but within a week, I was able to resume normal operational leadership of the company I had founded. However, the emotional and professional toll of the betrayal extended far beyond the immediate resolution of legal issues. The stress of fighting to reclaim my own company had affected my sleep, appetite, and confidence in ways that surprised me with their intensity. Even after regaining control of company operations, I found myself second-guessing business decisions and feeling suspicious of new partnerships or employee relationships. The experience had shattered my assumptions about trust and professional relationships in ways that would require time and conscious effort to heal. The team's response to the resolution was overwhelmingly supportive, but it also revealed how much damage Marcus's manipulation had caused to our company culture and internal relationships. Several employees apologized for participating in documentation of my alleged performance issues, explaining that they had been misled about the purpose of their feedback and felt guilty about contributing to Marcus's deception. Elena and David organized a team meeting to discuss how to rebuild trust and communication practices that would prevent similar manipulation in the future. Customer relationships required careful attention as many clients had been confused by the conflicting information they had received about company leadership and ownership changes. I spent considerable time conducting individual calls with key accounts to explain what had happened and to reassure them about continuity of service and product development. Most customers were supportive and appreciative of the transparency, but the incident had created uncertainty about our company's stability that would take time to overcome. The financial impact of the attempted acquisition and subsequent legal resolution was significant but manageable given our strong operational foundation. Legal expenses, forensic accounting costs, and lost productivity during the dispute period created unexpected expenses, but our healthy cash flow and customer base provided the resources needed to weather the crisis. However, the incident had delayed important product development initiatives and partnership opportunities that would need to be resumed as part of our recovery process. Marcus's departure from the company was swift and legally complex, involving negotiation of severance terms, return of company property, and execution of non-disclosure agreements that would prevent further interference with our operations. His equity stake was forfeited due to breach of fiduciary duty provisions in our original partnership agreement, which provided some financial compensation for the damage he had caused. However, the legal settlement also included non-disparagement clauses that limited my ability to publicly discuss the details of his deception. 6 months later, our company had not only recovered from the attempted hostile takeover, but had emerged stronger and more resilient than before the crisis. The experience had forced us to examine and strengthen our corporate governance procedures, documentation practices, and internal communication systems in ways that would protect against future manipulation. We implemented quarterly all-hands meetings where major business decisions were transparently discussed, established clearer documentation requirements for operational changes, and created multiple approval layers for any modifications to equity or governance structures. The industry response to our successful defense against the attempted acquisition was overwhelmingly positive and led to unexpected opportunities for growth and partnership development. Several venture capital firms reached out to discuss investment opportunities, impressed by our ability to maintain operations and customer relationships during a significant internal crisis. Industry colleagues who had supported me during the dispute became valuable advisors and advocates who helped expand our professional network and market opportunities. The experience also transformed my approach to leadership and business development in ways that ultimately strengthened both my company and my professional reputation. I became more strategic about partnership evaluations, more thorough in legal documentation review, and more deliberate about building diverse advisory relationships that could provide independent perspectives on major business decisions. The hard-won knowledge about corporate governance and legal protection became valuable expertise that I could share with other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges. Looking back on the year that followed Marcus's attempted theft of my company, I realized that surviving such a devastating professional betrayal had actually enhanced my credibility and influence within the tech entrepreneurship community. Speaking at industry conferences about corporate governance and partnership protection became a significant part of my professional identity, and the experience had given me unique insights that were valuable to other founders navigating complex business relationships. The attempted acquisition had been intended to destroy my career, but fighting back successfully had ultimately elevated my professional standing and created new opportunities for impact and leadership. The most important lesson from this experience was understanding that professional betrayal, while devastating in the moment, can become a source of strength and wisdom when confronted with courage and proper support. The skills I developed in gathering evidence, building legal cases, and maintaining operational focus during crisis situations became permanent additions to my leadership toolkit. More importantly, surviving Marcus's systematic deception proved to myself and others that integrity and determination could triumph over manipulation and fraud, even when the stakes were extremely high and the odds seemed impossible. Professional healing from such a significant betrayal required both individual reflection and community support that took months to fully develop. Working with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma helped me process the emotional impact of having my trust systematically exploited by someone I had considered a genuine partner. The experience had created lingering effects on my ability to trust new business relationships and my confidence in evaluating people's motivations, but professional counseling provided tools for rebuilding healthy skepticism without becoming cynical or paranoid. The support of industry colleagues, customers, and team members during the crisis had revealed the strength of professional relationships I had built over years of authentic leadership and genuine service to others. Elena and David's willingness to testify on my behalf, despite potential professional risks, demonstrated the loyalty that comes from treating employees as valued colleagues rather than replaceable resources. Customer support during the uncertainty period showed that focusing on their success rather than short-term profits had created relationships strong enough to withstand significant disruption. Rebuilding my company's reputation and market position after the attempted acquisition required strategic communication about what had happened while respecting legal limitations on public discussion of the dispute. Industry publications were interested in covering the story as an example of successful defense against hostile takeover attempts, but I chose to focus public statements on lessons learned about corporate governance rather than personal details about Marcus's deception. This approach protected both my company's reputation and my own professional standing while still providing valuable information to other entrepreneurs. The experience fundamentally changed my perspective on entrepreneurship and business partnership in ways that influenced every subsequent decision about company growth and strategic relationships. I became much more deliberate about legal documentation, more thorough in background investigation of potential partners, and more insistent on maintaining independent relationships with investors, customers, and industry colleagues. These changes created additional operational complexity but provided essential protection against future manipulation or betrayal. The professional vindication that came from successfully defending my company against Marcus's attempted theft created opportunities for industry leadership and advocacy that extended far beyond my original business goals. Speaking engagements at entrepreneurship conferences, advisory roles with startup accelerators, and mentorship relationships with other women entrepreneurs became significant parts of my professional identity. The experience had given me credibility and expertise in areas of corporate governance and partnership protection that were valuable to the broader entrepreneurship community. The transformation of a devastating professional crisis into a source of strength and wisdom demonstrated the importance of fighting back against workplace injustice rather than accepting defeat or seeking quiet resolution. Marcus's systematic deception had been designed to isolate me from support systems and convince me that challenging his authority would be futile and professionally destructive. However, gathering evidence, building legal cases, and maintaining operational focus during the crisis had revealed personal resilience and professional competence that I hadn't fully recognized before the betrayal occurred. The lessons learned from surviving such an extreme case of professional betrayal became a framework for helping other entrepreneurs protect themselves against similar manipulation and fraud. Understanding the warning signs of systematic deception, the importance of maintaining independent documentation, and the value of diverse advisory relationships became knowledge that I could share through speaking engagements, mentorship programs, and industry publications. The experience had been intended to destroy my career, but fighting back successfully had actually enhanced my influence and credibility within the entrepreneurship community. For anyone facing workplace betrayal or professional deception, the most important insight from my experience is that justice is possible when victims have the courage to fight back with evidence and qualified support. Marcus's systematic manipulation had been sophisticated and legally complex, but it could not withstand scrutiny when confronted with forensic analysis, witness testimony, and determined legal advocacy. The key was refusing to accept his narrative of inevitability and investing the time and resources necessary to build a comprehensive case for restoration of legitimate governance. The patterns of professional betrayal that I experienced are unfortunately common in many workplace environments, particularly in startups and high-growth companies, where governance structures may be informal and documentation practices may be inconsistent. Protecting yourself requires maintaining independent records of important decisions, building diverse professional relationships that can provide support during crises, and understanding your legal rights regarding equity, governance, and operational authority. Most importantly, it requires recognizing that fighting back against systematic deception is not just about personal vindication. It's about protecting the integrity of professional relationships and business practices that affect entire industries. The warning signs that I missed during Marcus's systematic preparation for his attempted takeover are important lessons for anyone in professional partnerships or leadership roles. Gradual exclusion from strategic discussions, requests for documentation that seems unnecessary, and subtle changes in communication patterns often indicate manipulation that is being planned rather than routine evolution of business relationships. The key is maintaining awareness of these patterns while building independent verification systems that can detect unauthorized changes to legal or operational structures. Building resilience against professional betrayal requires both individual preparation and community support systems that can provide assistance when crises occur. Having qualified legal counsel, forensic accounting resources, and industry relationships that are independent of immediate business partners creates essential protection against systematic deception. Equally important is maintaining personal confidence and decision-making ability under pressure, which requires both professional counseling support and clear understanding of your legal rights and business authority. The experience taught me that recovery from professional betrayal is not just about restoring previous conditions. It's about building stronger systems and relationships that can prevent similar manipulation while creating opportunities for growth and positive impact. The skills developed during crisis management, the relationships strengthened through shared challenges, and the credibility earned through successful resistance to fraud became permanent advantages that enhanced both my company's market position and my personal professional standing. If you're watching this because you've experienced workplace betrayal, professional deception, or systematic undermining of your career achievements, please know that fighting back is both possible and worthwhile. The process requires courage, resources, and qualified support, but justice can prevail when victims refuse to accept defeat and commit to building comprehensive cases for restoration of their rights. Your professional integrity and business achievements are worth defending, and your experience can become a source of strength and wisdom that benefits both your own career and the broader professional community. I want to hear from others who have faced similar challenges in their professional lives. Have you experienced systematic manipulation by business partners, workplace betrayal by colleagues you trusted, or attempts to steal credit for your professional achievements? Please share your experiences in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. Your stories matter, and together we can build awareness about these issues while supporting each other through the challenges of maintaining integrity in competitive professional environments. Subscribe to this channel for more content about entrepreneurship, workplace justice, and building resilient professional relationships. In upcoming videos, I'll be sharing specific strategies for protecting yourself against professional manipulation, legal resources for entrepreneurs facing governance disputes, and interviews with other business leaders who have successfully overcome workplace betrayal. The goal is creating a community where professional integrity is valued and supported, and where people have the knowledge and resources needed to defend their rights and achievements. Remember that your professional worth is not determined by those who try to undermine or steal your achievements. Marcus's systematic deception was designed to convince me that I was incompetent and that accepting his authority was my only option for professional survival. However, fighting back revealed both my own resilience and the support available from industry colleagues, customers, and team members who recognized authentic leadership and genuine business achievement. Your career belongs to you, and you have both the right and the ability to defend it against those who would exploit your trust and steal your success. The future of professional relationships and business ethics depends on people having the courage to resist systematic deception and hold manipulative colleagues accountable for their actions. Every successful challenge to workplace betrayal makes it more difficult for future predators to exploit trust and steal achievements from dedicated professionals. By sharing our experiences and supporting each other through these challenges, we can create work environments where integrity is rewarded and manipulation is recognized and rejected before it can cause serious damage. Thank you for watching, and please remember that justice is possible when we have the courage to fight for it.